All right. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. Good afternoon to some, good evening, hopefully, to very few. Thank you for joining us. This is going to be an exciting panel. My name is Trey Herr. I run the Cyber Statecraft Initiative here at the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security at the Atlantic Council. And I'd like to introduce our panel before we get into this topic. First, Leo Siminovich, our Vice President and Global Head of Industrial Cyber and Digital Security at Siemens Energy. Leo is responsible for setting the strategic direction for Siemens industrial cybersecurity business worldwide. He's particularly focused on solving cybersecurity challenges in the oil and gas and power sectors. Previously, Leo led the cyber risk analytics practice area at Booz Allen Hamilton. Next, Gil Quinones, President and CEO of the New York Power Authority. Gil has served in his current role at the nation's largest state-owned electric utility since 2011. He is responsible for developing and implementing the statewide utility strategic vision and mission for supervising its operations, legal and financial matters, and relationships with external stakeholders. Mr. Quinones is co-chair of the board of directors of the Alliance to Save Energy and serves on the boards of New York State Energy Research and Development Authority and the Large Public Power Council. And finally, we have Joy Ditto, President and CEO of American Public Power Association. Joy became the association's president and CEO on January 13th, 2020. Before that, she was president and CEO of the Utilities Technology Council, a global trade association representing electric, gas, and water utilities on their mission-critical information and communications technologies. Earlier, Joy spent 7 years on Capitol Hill, including as a staff assistant to Senator John McCain in her first job out of college. We're going to hear remarks from our very important guest here in just a moment, and then a panel discussion with the group. We'll have some questions, and then we'll invite questions from the audience before we wrap. So without further ado, let me please introduce General Wesley Clark, Chairman and Executive Officer of Wesley K. Clark and Associates. General Clark is a businessman, educator, writer, and commentator who retired as a four-star general after 38 years in the United States Army, having served in his last assignments as Commander of U.S. Southern Command and Supreme Allied Commander Europe. He received a Silver Star, Bronze Star, and Purple Heart for service in Vietnam, graduated first in his class at West Point before reading for philosophy, politics, and economics at Oxford University as a Rhodes Scholar. He most recently served as co-chair of the National Commission on Grid Resilience, and we are delighted to welcome here today. General Clark, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks so much to the Atlantic Council and my fellow panelists for this discussion. This is, we're talking about probably the greatest single national security threat that we have today, and maybe the greatest national security threat we've ever had in American history. We're talking about the electricity grid. And after 9/11, of course, the United States became very interested in trying to understand what critical assets had to be protected. We defined critical infrastructure. We have the transportation network, we have the pipeline network, we have aviation, we have shipping on rail, but nothing works without electricity. Generators can't store enough fuel to maintain indefinite supply. So the electricity grid is really, it's the heart of America's infrastructure. It's the most valuable.
All right, well, we wait for General Clark to rejoin us here. Always the excitement in a Zoom conversation. Let's get into at least our first panel conversation, first panel question. The event today, Securing the Energy Transition, Innovative Cyber Solutions for Grid Resilience. So I want to go to the entire group and sort of start us off with a scoping question. Thinking about the grid and thinking about sort of the novel threats that we see arrayed against it, how has the energy transition impacted the cybersecurity of the electric grid? What's the trade-off between new efficiencies or lower emission and these new vulnerabilities for electric grid and energy infrastructure that we're seeing? If we wouldn't mind, why don't we start with Leo and then Gil and then Joy?
Thanks, Trey. And I see General Clark is back. I'm not sure if you can hear us.
General Clark, can you hear us, sir?
I can hear you. And
fantastic. All right, we'll throw it back to you.
Alternate device, not going through Comcast.
Excellent, sir. Thank you.
So, but let's go ahead with the questions. and let's go right into the panel, okay?
All right, fantastic. So just to restate the question for the group, and I think again, going Leo, Gil, Joy, and then ending with you, General Clark, sir, we're looking to understand how is the energy transition, how is a changing electric grid impacted the cybersecurity of that grid? What's the trade-off between new efficiencies and lower emissions, and then new vulnerabilities for the electric grid and energy infrastructure?
So I'll start. Thanks, Trey. We're in the midst of an energy revolution. The energy system is changing, and it's changing rapidly. With the quick uptake of renewables, with the grid becoming more distributed, more decentralized, and frankly, more efficient. Unmanned power plants are not the dreams of tomorrow. We at Siemens Energy are working with customers all over the world to make them a reality today. Here in the United States, the commitment from 15 states, including Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico, will change the energy mix from 17% last year to already 28% today, and by upping their targets to over 50%. That's a big change, and it's opening up a lot of possibilities. Asset management, performance management, more efficient dispatch, and ultimately a more reliable grid is the opportunity here. And yet, what we've seen with the recent wildfires, with hurricanes, is that the stability of the grid is under pressure, and that security could be the catalyst for a massive disruption. Just a few years ago, a downed tree caused a massive blackout. Imagine what an attack by an adversary could do. The challenge that we're faced with today, and my fellow panelists I think will comment on this in greater depth, is that the grid was never designed with security in mind. Many of the assets are old, digital was bolted on top, and many of the assets just don't speak the same language. This has created a security architecture challenge. How do we address the stability of the grid as we undergo this massive transformation?
That's helpful, Leo. Thanks. And I think it illustrates some of the technological changes we're talking about that are driving part of the reason for this panel. Gil?
Yes, thank you, and good morning, everyone. The New York Power Authority is the largest state-owned electric utility in the United States. We produce about 25% of all electricity in New York, and we own a third of the high voltage power grid. And the grid, not just in New York, but in many states, are really evolving from a one-way power flow system where you have big power plants, transmission lines, distribution system, and then to customers, to really now an intelligent, decentralized and integrated network. So because of technology innovation, you have a lot more distributed energy resources, whether they're solar panels and batteries, et cetera, electric cars. And many, as Leo mentioned, many of the states are also evolving to a cleaner energy system, a cleaner energy mix. A state like New York, we have probably one of the most aggressive goals of having 70% renewable by 2030 and a carbon-free electric system by 2040. And so the borrowing probably from General Clark's lingo, military lingo, the threat surface is a lot bigger. And there are a lot more points that can be attacked by our adversaries. And this is not about, just individual hackers trying to disrupt. We are talking about nation states with all the expertise and the resources. As General Clark mentioned, electricity is like the oxygen of the economy, right? Without electricity, you're taking that oxygen out of the economy. So it's very, very critical. And so this transition from a one-way power flow to a multi-flow, decentralized power system, and the move to a cleaner energy mix is really going to be complicated. And cyber has to be purposely built from the beginning as we do this transition.
Hi, I'm going to just jump in right now. I think Gil's done. So Gil is one of my member utilities, and I am Joy Ditto with the American Public Power Association. And we are a national trade association with members in 49 states, all but Hawaii, unfortunately, and in several of the territories. We serve 49, our members collectively serve 49 million Americans. We're not-for-profit electric utilities, typically affiliated with municipal government, but sometimes affiliated with states such as NIPA. And we were created in many cases over 100 years ago to serve customers who are unserved or underserved, kind of similar to some of the experiences with broadband today. So we're about 15%, 1/5 of the energy mix. And we employ 93,000 people in our industry. So I will just say quickly, just to kind of be a little bit contrarian here, I would disagree that the grid was not built, and it's not one grid, it's many grids, as Gil kind of alluded to. But I would disagree that the grids were not built with security in mind. They were, and in fact, the way we manage such a highly reliable grid with 99.999% reliability, and that was deemed by Time Magazine as the greatest engineering feat in the 20th century, is because we are all constantly thinking about how to prevent our grids from going down, whether they be from natural disasters or otherwise. And when they do go down, we're always thinking about that resilience piece. How do we get our grids back up again as quickly as possible? I think the challenge here with cybersecurity is that when the digitalization of our country started evolving in the 80s, as we weren't as situationally aware at that point as to how to install the cybersecurity elements of that digitization into our grids at that point as we were deploying them in the 80s. We really didn't start to evolve our thinking around cybersecurity in that regard really until the 2000s. And you guys might remember Y2K and sort of how that started to spark some conversations about how our transition into this digital world might affect grid operations. Luckily, we haven't experienced an operational impact to the electric grid from a cybersecurity attack yet in the US, but we've certainly seen it internationally, and we're certainly cognizant of it. And I think one of the things that I would say in terms of the landscape, and agreeing with my panelists, is that as we deploy more digital technology to ensure our grid remains reliable when we're integrating intermittent renewable energy sources like solar and wind, and also having that two-way conversation with our customers to ensure they can plug in their electric vehicles at night and use some of their resources for the benefit of the grid, that requires a high level of situational awareness, which in turn requires increased digitalization, which provides some additional vectors for cyber attack. But I would say, contrasting this with the 80s, we now understand we have to build that cybersecurity in from the beginning. So it's sort of, we're catching up a little bit in terms of some of our legacy systems that have been in since the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, and trying to make sure that they're secure, or that we have awareness as to how they're interfacing with our current system. But we have a heightened sense of awareness about that cybersecurity component going in now. So with that, I'll turn it back over.
No, it's useful to hear that side of what's being done defensively, but I want to go to General Clark, because I think we're alluding to, but want to get some detail on the meat of the question. Can you put the consequences of a cyber attack against the electrical grid or against power generation in context for our audience from a national security perspective?
From a national security, well, first of all, we've got state actors who are working against us. And this really started back in the 90s when we went into remote control, as people would say, or we call it SCADA. So it's supervisory control and data acquisition systems. So people are not actually with hands-on. There's not people running and looking at every gauge that's connected to a generator or every voltmeter that's showing flow. This stuff is all over the internet now, and that's what's created the vulnerabilities for us. And really, after we did Stuxnet, people realized around the world, we confirmed for them that bits and bytes could actually be transformed into physical damage. So through the internet, hostile actors could conceivably get into our electricity grid and actually cause transformers to blow up. There's a very few transformers in the country, big transformers, 400-ton monsters that we don't build, that we import from overseas. And a few of these are handling 60 or 70% of the total power in the United States. So we do have some key nodes of vulnerability. They're accessible by adversaries abroad. And if it were to go down, it would take down transportation, it would take down communications, it would take down pipelines. So you can't talk, you can't move fuel, hospitals don't work, you can't distribute food, you can't harvest, you can't coordinate. So this is really the sort of the greatest vulnerability of the United States. And what we know is that our adversaries do study this. They are reconning it, doing reconnaissance through cyber intrusions on a daily basis, thousands of them a day. They're going after all components of the system. They go after the generation system, the transmission system, the distribution system, and the connections with the end users. And as Gil said a minute ago, as we have multiplied the system's complexity in search of greater efficiency and bringing in new technology, we've really increased the number of attack surfaces. So I'm sure these hostile or adversarial state organizations are really going after us. We didn't understand how bad this was until in 2015, a Russian cyber attack shut down much of the electricity in eastern Ukraine. And the next year they came in and not only attacked the distribution system, but the transmission system. So they went after the transformers. And what we have now is a catch-up in place. This is a complicated ecosystem of 5,000 or more actors. Some are not for profit, some are for profit. Most are regulated. They're trying to make money on this system. They're trying to produce the service at lowest cost and greatest reliability. And now they're under continuous attack. They haven't shut down our system, but we do believe that there's malware in it. And we do believe that adversarial nations would put not only malware in through the internet, but would sell us hardware that would contain the malware. And so we're in an adversarial environment. While we're trying to make a profit, provide a service, deal with storms and fires and all these other things. And so I can just imagine the pressures that are on Siemens to produce the equipment that can't be hacked and manipulated, or the New York Power Authority that's got to worry about storms and sea level rise and cyber attacks now, or the utilities who are trying to do all this and work with public oversight, and they're dealing with threats that are actually in their nature, they're classified. So when you go and ask for rate increases, people say, well, why? And you say, there's a threat. They say, what's the threat? How serious is this? And actually, some parts of it you can't explain publicly. So that's kind of where we are in terms of this. And Trey, I think that really helps our audience pull together the components here and the perspectives of our panelists.
It's helpful, and it's interesting because it provokes a question, at least for Gil, as I'm listening to this. The consequences that we're talking about are significant, but they're also a little bit different, it sounds like, from the more traditional challenges of maintaining a safe electrical grid, one that's highly available, that's responsive to consumer demand. How do the consequences, Gil, of a cyber attack translate to operational challenges for a large-scale critical infrastructure operator like NEPA?
Well, it can have a severe impact. For example, as I've said, NYPA produces 25% of all electricity in New York. We own a third of the transmission system. So think of the New York Power Authority as the backbone of the bulk power system here in New York. And a severe damage on us can, impact the grid at large. So the good news is that there are a lot of efforts going on in our industry with the private sector, with government, a lot of partnerships. The American Public Power Association, along with the other trade associations and the government, formed a group called the Electricity Subsector Coordinating Council. And that's the group that really coordinates our collective preparation, because we really need collective preparation, collective defense, and collective response when it comes to cyber. Those are the guiding principles. And there are partnerships that are more on a bilateral basis. For example, NIPA and Siemens have partnered to form a center of excellence on cybersecurity. NIPA has an advanced grid innovation lab for energy, and we're partnering with the technologies from Siemens to simulate, to exercise, and to see what the vulnerabilities are. And we intend to bring other partners in that partnership, from academia, research labs, other utilities, grid operators, solutions providers, etc. Because again, I go back to this threat needs collective defense, collective response, and collective preparation.
We're turning to something a little more positive. I keep hearing the word defense. So Leo, I want to go to you for a second because we've talked a lot about the challenges. Flipping this to talk about defense, where might there be technologies that offer solutions or a leg up to help industry gain some measure of advantage against attackers?
Is this for me or Leo?
Sorry, for Leo.
Well, Trey, while we're waiting for Leo to come in, can I jump in on that answer?
By all means, sir.
So, the military has worked really hard to provide hardened networks and hardened communications. And we put a lot of money in it, and we're really good at it. And we do have technology that is, we think, impenetrable. That is to say, you can wrap data streams in other data streams and have double and triple encryption. And it's not possible to see what those data streams are. And so, provided your operators and the human element is solid, you can do end-to-end security of data in motion or at rest. But the problem is that everybody has legacy networks. And so when you take the military technology out and say, how would you like to use this military-grade cybersecurity? They say, well, how do we plug it in? Because, we've got our SCADA systems, and we've got this, and we've got that, and we've got firewalls, and we've got virus filters, and how does it fit? And so when you go through the American economy, you find out that everything is layered on top of everything else. And all of our utilities, all of our big corporations, they're all using legacy systems. Just like in the US military, we're still using batch processing for some systems, but we've layered on top of that. So this creates a real complexity in bringing in new technology. You have to find ways you have to locate the vulnerabilities of the system, and then you have to find the technologies that will protect it. So if you were going to attack the system, you'd want to cause an overload in a system that would then, in a generator, in a transformer, that would then break the larger system. So what you have to have is the alerting mechanisms, the quick disconnects, and these are appliques or inserts into the existing systems. When you try to get the cyber protection in, it's much harder because of the complexity of the existing networks and data systems.
A considerable challenge. I know. Yeah, and I know one Siemens has been thinking about, and Leo as well has been talking about. So Leo, maybe to turn to you, where are there opportunities here? What can we be doing from a technology standpoint to actually give defenders a leg up?
Yeah. So digitalization and cybersecurity are two sides of the same coin. And what we've seen, to General Clark's point, is that because of the complexity of the system, the central problem that we need to solve is that of visibility. We cannot protect what we cannot see. And as our energy system undergoes this rapid transformation, and as we add more layers to the system, we need to equip ourselves with the monitoring capability that enables us to spot attackers before they can strike. And yet, today, what we have are two central challenges. The first is the technical challenge. Because of the complexity of the system, because you have a brownfield environment that is not easily predisposed to doing monitoring. Many of the assets are serial, many of them have been unpatched, many of them are disconnected or have intermittent connectivity. It's difficult to extract the information. The other big challenge is that what we're talking about is a digital command potentially impacting the physical world. So we have to look at both the digital side and the physical side to understand how one impacts the other and vice versa. Gil mentioned we are becoming bidirectional and maybe even multidirectional. So an attack that could start way down the supply chain could quickly cascade and cause a shutdown. The third challenge is the resource challenge. Many grid operators today do not have the resources in-house to tackle this problem. And because it requires depth, it requires scale, it requires expertise, and ultimately we're only as good as the weakest link. So what's important, and this is where Siemens has been working very hard, is to come up with solutions that give us visibility, that give us context, and that ultimately give us the insight to take proportionate response. We today announced a launch of our managed detection and response offering, which is powered by AI and machine learning. You know, the question is always, how can we leapfrog the attackers? How can we get faster? How can we get smarter? And the best way to do that is using technology that already exists today and using data that's already available and that we collect for operational purposes. So the way that we're thinking about this problem is in the form of combining the technical resources, the human resources, the best of Siemens and decades of experience as OEM to build that monitoring and detection that is absolutely necessary for us to understand our risk.
That's helpful. And actually, but you mentioned something interesting as we get into this. No one has infinite resources. Everybody is operating under significant constraints, that much more so for small and medium utilities. And so, Joy, I want to turn to you for a second. Thinking about the APPA membership, what sort of unique challenges do these entities face in building effective cybersecurity defenses? How do they balance protecting critical infrastructure with ensuring their own long-term sustainability?
So I mentioned that earlier on that we have 2,000 publicly owned utilities across the country. Of those 2,000, the vast majority are in communities of 10,000 people or less. Okay, so these are hugely small towns. We have a subset of our members who are serving large cities, but in about half, I'm not kidding you, half, 1,000 at least, probably more, but our information is not quite that granular, of those utilities do not even have a SCADA system. They are operating their grids electromechanically. So there is no vulnerability from an OT standpoint, operational technology standpoint, for at least half of our members. They may very well implement SCADA systems in the future to deal with some of the issues we've been talking about, to allow for more of the two-way communication, adding some additional elements to their grids, and they certainly should consider that in the future. But I think they'll be in some ways better off in kind of leapfrogging and being able to put in kind of that newer cybersecurity technology from the beginning. For those remaining 1,000 or so, they are very small still, with the exception of some of my larger members like Gil and NIPA. And those challenges are real in terms of making sure that situational awareness is there, like Leo was talking about. They don't have many staff on board. So there's a couple of things though that I think is important to note. Those small systems do not impact the bulk power system in the sense that they can take down the grid. As a sector, we have long sort of seen these cyber security issues as well as other security issues in kind of a defense in depth approach, where you deal with the most potential risk first. So we're the only sector with mandatory cybersecurity standards on the bulk power system. That's not the end of the story, but we are dealing with some of those larger connected utilities that actually could have a cascading effect on each other if they get a cyber attack. However, it doesn't mean that we don't still have to deal with these vulnerabilities in these smaller systems, and certainly we want to. One of the things we partnered with DOE in the last several years on building out that education in the first instance of what is the risk, their cybersecurity maturity. We developed a scorecard related to that, educated a lot of our members working with DOE from a funding standpoint. And we've just been granted another $6 million funding opportunity with DOE, as have our brethren, the Rural Electric Cooperative Group, to actually build out OT technology, not ourselves, but working with third parties to then disseminate to some of these smaller systems, but any of our systems, frankly. So that's exciting. The last thing I would say is that going back to that situational awareness piece, that applies whether you're large or small. And we have in our industry, I think, really embraced information sharing from the government through various information sharing and analysis centers. We use the multi-state ISAC as well as the e-ISAC, electricity ISAC. We also interface, as Gil said, quite heavily with our government partners through the ESCC. These security coordinating councils were developed after 9/11 to enable critical infrastructure sectors to talk to each other more fully without it being public. And we've been really building out that relationship. We have security clearances for many in our industry now that we didn't have before. So we're getting briefed on some of these vulnerabilities. And then we developed this idea of cyber mutual assistance. Our industry is very good at helping each other out, restore from storms. You guys have seen it time and again. We've even done it in the middle of a pandemic through 2 hurricanes and a tropical storm in the last several months. We are bringing that concept to cybersecurity. How do we develop out and build out a cybersecurity mutual assistance program? And we're starting to talk through that more and more. And some of our larger brethren in the investor and utility segment and in the public power segment are kind of leading the way there. And then we'll trickle it down to some of the smaller entities. So I don't want to minimize that there's a risk. I just want to kind of put in perspective that risk, that risk and what it is, and then how we're sort of taking steps to address it over time.
And Trey, if I can just add to Joy, our industry also is unique in a way that we have mandatory regulatory rules under the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, as overseen by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And we get audited. We can be fined up to $1 million a day if we don't comply with cyber security regulations. And that kind of serves the floor for us. We need to do a lot more on top of that to deal with this threat. As Joy mentioned, a lot of information sharing both with the government and some public sector companies that are providing those kind of services. And really now we're focusing on the supply chain. The General Clark just mentioned, right, that we buy a lot of equipment from abroad. In some cases, electronics get sent, even if they're made in the United States, get sent to outside the United States to get integrated in those equipment. And we need to create that system. There was a recent executive order from the federal government to look at that. And the industry now, electric industry, is working with government to operationalize that process of dealing with supply chain. There's also a lot of research and development happening in our national labs and entities like the Electric Power Research Institute, looking at the various risks associated in our industry, cyber risk.
We're going to take questions from the audience here, so start to feed those in. But Gil, I want to follow up on one thing you just mentioned.
You've got those questions.
Clark, we'll go to you.
I just wanted to say quickly before we bring the audience in, one of the things that we have to think about is what Gil mentioned about the regulation, because there are 2 fundamental facts about cybersecurity and on the electricity grid. Number 1 is no one's really in charge. And number 2 is there's no real accountability for what's been done. It's true that NERC can go out and fine if you don't meet the standards, but if you ask, what's the status across the grid of various measures, there's no real way of finding out who's put in the latest cyber, who hasn't, where's the weakness in the specific transmission system. Some report recommends you do A, B, and C. Was it done? How do you follow up on it? That's not available. And partly it's because the oversight and regulation of this electricity sector has emerged the same way the electricity sector did. There's FERC, there's NERC, there's the Department of Energy, Department of Homeland Security. There's an organization called EISAC, which operates out of NERC, which is the Electricity Information Sharing and Analysis Center. But as Gil indicated, companies still hire their private cybersecurity information also. And then there's DARPA, which is doing work. It's not coordinated at the National Security Council level, is what I'm saying. And it's not coordinated in the Congress. It's distributed among a bunch of agencies. So when we go into we have to just appreciate that we need some leadership here to pull this all together and keep us safe.
Helpful to get that sense of fragmentation, right, in terms of the regulatory and the policy response. Gil, a quick follow-up question to you, and maybe Leo to bring you in on this as well. How effective is the transition to practice from the labs to the operators and to the operational technology community? Is this a long chain of research, or do you feel like there's real good practical transmission happening from the work at the labs out to the practice area?
I believe there is good, movement and transition from what's happening in our national labs. Idaho National Lab, they do a great job on cyber. Pacific Northwest National Labs, Sandia, and entities like the Electric Power Research Institute. I think there are good from a threat detection, from supply chain, information sharing. So there's always room for improvement, but I think there's good partnership. As what General Clark said, while there is fragmentation, I feel that there is now a movement to really coordinate our efforts, both public and private. As you know, there was just a report issued by the Cyber Solarium Commission, which was a bipartisan group, including private sector entities. In fact, one of the co-chairs of the Electricity Subsector Coordinating Council, Tom Fanning, who's the CEO of Southern Company, he is a member of the Cyber Solarium Commission. So, and that's the attempt to kind of consolidate this from a high level. There's still a lot of work to be done on the tactical level, but I'm encouraged by not only the research pipeline, the R&D pipeline, but also again, this collective preparation, collective defense, collective response that is needed to address this threat.
Can I jump in here really quickly? And I know you want to go to Leo too, but just to key off of what Gil just said, yes, everything he said is absolutely true. And I think it just goes back to that idea of cyber mutual assistance, other mutual assistance that we've stood up even more fully over the last, 20. But also wanted to say, again, I'm kind of the contrarian of the group today. Is I think on the policy level, having that consolidation through the Cyberspace Solarium initiative and other initiatives is really helpful. I think the fragmentation of our industry and the way we've grown up as 3,000 electric utilities and the fact that we have small separate grids, mini distribution grids. We don't have one grid. There's not one grid in our country. Even on an interconnection wide basis, there are 3 in the lower 48 states. And so I think that actually think about if we just had one state utility that was for the entire country, one utility with one grid. And if bad guys got into that and took that down, you could have a really serious situation. So I actually think having the fragmentation has a little bit of a positive element to it. But again, bringing some of this kind of collective policy response and also understanding how we respond if there is an operational impact anywhere. How do we bring our collective resources to bear to respond to that, to get the grid back up wherever that grid may be within the US? I think that's going to be important. So I just wanted to key off of that very quickly.
No, it's really helpful. Leo,
Yeah.
closing us out on this. Thoughts on that
Yeah.
transmission level?
Well, to add to what Joy said, the title of this panel is Innovative Solutions. We need to get faster at bringing those innovative solutions that are built for purpose to market. And we need to partner together to do this. Operational technology has become the new risk frontier. There's no doubt about that. And we need to build collective defenses. If you think about our partnership with NIPA, the Center of Excellence that we're building, one of the pillars is around innovation and testing solutions and bringing them to market quicker with the right level of validation so that we can put trust into the technology that we're deploying. Bringing IT solutions that are being repurposed just doesn't work. A simple vulnerability scan can bring down the whole system. And yet we have so many tools that are at our disposal. We need to work together, the asset owners, the OEM, with depth of expertise. And ultimately, we need to make all of this affordable, because some of the smaller utilities need to access this technology and access the human expertise with ease. Because today there's lots of solutions that are out there, lots of buzzwords around what's good, what's bad. It's creating a lot of confusion. So we need a validation mechanism and partnerships to help us prove out technology and bring it to market faster.
It's helpful, and it actually lines up with a question from Thomas here, so I want to offer this to the group. What does the panel believe we can do to shift the onus of security to operators, not just security professionals within utilities? For example, utilities in the Southeast have put line breaks in transmission lines to harden against hurricanes. Are we challenging operators to think about engineering resilience into both electric and OT systems? Gil, why don't we start with you and then come back to the panel?
Yeah, I mean, that's happening already. For example, in our company, we have protocols on how to operate our power plants manually. So while NIPA has this aspiration to be the first end-to-end digital utility, we didn't remove the manual controls of our plant so that just in case something happens, we can operate, and we drill on it. Now that's one way of doing it, and in everything that we do now, as we maintain our plants and substations and transmission system, as we do capital program, cybersecurity is purposely built right from the beginning. So it's part of the process right from the very beginning of that planning process.
It's helpful. Any of the other panelists, General Clark, Joy?
So I think that when you look at how we do this, one of the issues we have is it's always the trade-off between efficiency and security. So as Leo was saying, we're looking for new solutions. But if you put in a physical piece of equipment that can be reprogrammed while it's in place, which much of our operating equipment has, then there's a door, an IT door that comes into that. And then the question is, who controls that IT door? And how do we know that? So you end up with more and more and wider attack surfaces, and you have to spread your security further along. I agree with what Joy was saying, that I think the fragmentation of the grid does have some security aspects that are positive to it. But we still need to really pull things together. Now, what we recommended in our report was creating something like a national training and testing center. So we would actually establish a grid network, let's say, in one of the old unused atomic energy facilities out west. We would have an operating grid. We would then create a red team that would use the most advanced intelligence on what the adversary is using. And then we apply that, and we invite our utilities and our suppliers to come in and challenge their equipment against the threat in a real operating environment. And then we'd be able to set realistic standards that could be moved out into the field that would encourage people to do this. We did this in the Army. This is the way we really built the armed forces after the Vietnam War, and to provide responsive support when we went into Iraq. We called them Army warfighter experiments. We picked a problem. We invited the suppliers, contractors to come in and work collaboratively with the service to solve the problem and then expedite the fielding of the solution. And so we think that this is something that the U.S. government should be working on. And at the same time, we think we need to build on Joy's idea of secure microgrids so that you would have around military bases or federal installations, you would have the ability to be disconnected from the main power grid and be resilient and survivable in the event of a catastrophe. And you would then have excess power to be able to help distribute across the grid as part of the recovery process. And this might involve large storage facilities like water storage in upstate New York. It might involve these small modularized nuclear reactors as power sources. It might involve renewable energy on bases in the American Southwest. But we need to look at how our national security apparatus can support the grid, because the grid it's an amazing, it's the most complex and one of the most efficient systems ever built by man. And it works for profit and service. And the people who are in it are fabulous. But then we have to somehow build the security framework around it. U.S. Cyber Command is not securing the electricity grid. We should just make that clear to everybody. So it's our responsibility to do it.
For more, for those interested, just quickly, the Global Energy Center website has some tremendous work on microgrids and on novel nuclear technologies. Joy, over to you, and then
I was just going to add, that's great, General Clark. And I think there's a little bit of what you're saying being done, not to the extent you're talking about, but the nice part is I think there's some of that work being done at Idaho National Labs, in particular with the Electric Power Research Institute and some of our actual utility employees going and doing some of that red team work. And hopefully working with DoD, but sometimes DoD doesn't want to talk about that and how we're partnering. So, but I think there is some of that seed of what you're talking about going on. And I think that's something the industry would welcome expanding upon. You know, like we were talking about with the smaller utilities, for those that have this exposure on the OT side, they wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity or ability to go out and do something like that. But having some expert who could come in and help them more readily available in this mutual assistance kind of framework idea, I think would be really helpful. And you know, one of the other things that I think, you know, we're just dealing with these sort of yin and yangs or polarities, and Leo kind of hit on it. You know, you've got cyber is kind of the yin and yang to digitalization, but then Gil talked about how we have to be prepared to go back to manual, you know, electricity provision. So we've got a lot of these different pushes and pulls right now in our industry, which I think is just important to note. One of the things that also hasn't really been raised yet, but I just want to mention, based on my previous tenure at the Utilities Technology Council, many utilities build out their own telecommunications network and have done for decades. They actually have a private utility or telecommunications network. So they actually have greater situational awareness into the network itself, that OT network. And in some cases, they're provisioning kind of some of their other, you know, telephonic services and stuff on the corporate side. But most of them are focused on the OT environment. And I think that's a helpful perspective to understand. Not that when there's an attack on one of our systems that's network is housed at AT&T or Verizon, that's always a bad thing. But I think if we really got into a serious scenario, there would be greater situational awareness with our smaller private network environment. In that situation, we would have the ability to sort of forensically unpack that a little bit more easily than working with an AT&T or Verizon. But it also brings up, when you don't have that, if your network provider is one of the big telecommunications companies, how are we working with them kind of inner critical infrastructure wise? And we are working with them. We are, especially with the telecommunications and financial services sectors, we've started more dialogue with them in recent years. It's, you know, and it's going well. It's, you know, it's not there or where it needs to be, but I would just note that. So I'll turn it back down.
And maybe last comment on that
Please.
point. we work with utilities all over the world, and the utilities that are leading on the topic of security are also digital companies. They've become digital companies by necessity. NIPA is a great example of utilities that's leading the way. And ultimately, what differentiates those utilities is not their fear of connectivity, to Joy's point, but the recognition that cybersecurity needs to be a core part of the business model. And that ultimately, like telephone companies that used to operate wires and have transitioned to becoming digital companies, utilities are going to be in the business of optimizing the assets using digital technologies. And ultimately, they are going to be digital companies. And that is here today, by the way. So cybersecurity, if we look at our experience, we've put cybersecurity at the core. We focused on industrial cybersecurity as a core topic, not just securing our products, but also ultimately providing innovative solutions. That recognition then leads to the right kind of resourcing and focus. And some of the recent activity around cost recovery of cybersecurity programs is a great step in that direction.
So Leah, let me come back to you and then we'll hit the panel. So we have a question, I think, that sits within that boundary of novel technology and security solutions from Aaron. I've spoken to experts who believe shifting from proprietary systems to open source technology would benefit grid reliability and functionality. What do you think of this option, and particularly the security implications of adopting open source solutions? And what if we could start with Leo and then go to the panel?
I think we have to live the reality that we've been dealt into. General Clark's point, we have a vast brownfield that's out there that has multiple, it's very heterogeneous. It has multiple technologies that do not speak the same language. And where I would focus and where we have focused with our managed detection offering and the detection platform that we've built is how do we detect across this heterogeneity? How do we spot the abnormalities and then decipher them, contextualize them to deal with the threats? Now, digital and native technologies, so if you think about renewables, are IP-based. In other words, they operate like regular computers. And so in many ways, they're already open source. Their problem is different. The speed of the attack is much faster, which means that we need to deploy AI not just to sort of decipher all this complexity, but actually deal with machine speed attacks and attacks like ransomware, which are holding utilities hostage.
Yeah, and if I can add to Leo, when utilities, just based on our experience, when we decided to invest in our digital transformation, we look really at about three, in addition to cybersecurity, because it's related, three different aspects that cuts across that transformation. So one is our enterprise architecture, and I don't think it's whether an open source or proprietary. As Leo said, they're just, the reality is there's a mixture in our asset base. So the first one is enterprise architecture. You want to make sure you're scalable. Second is on data governance and data integrity. Third is on standardizing your solutions or applications development across all of your digital initiatives, and to make sure that you build in cybersecurity and defense in depth at every point of that process. So to me, that is the more relevant way of looking at it, rather than just looking at it from an either open source or proprietary systems.
So Trey, if I could come in here, I think, what everybody's saying is we recognize we've got a real challenge here, and the system is adapting to it, and we're moving forward. The question is, have we been comprehensive enough in looking at it, and can we move forward fast enough and get ahead of the threat? And that's our challenge. Now, one of the things we didn't talk about this morning is the most important, really, element of our system is people. And so one of the things I'd like to say is my experience with the electricity grid operators and so forth is we put a lot of effort into training people and making them aware and sensitive to cybersecurity. So the sort of favored North Korean attack means is phishing. So they send an email in and they want you to open an attachment from a friend or a relative, or look at this new hardware that could come in. And they're pretty good at doing this. And we're getting really good at training people not to get phished. So so our security systems are built on people. And that's one of the things that I think we have to recognize. A lot of progress has been done, and we need to really compliment all of the actors and participants in the electricity grid. But how do we become proactive rather than reactive? And this really is the challenge, because this is like, hate to say this, I sound like an old general, but it's like an arms race. I mean, they develop an attack means we learn about it because we're observing, we're passing information, we're spreading the word. They watch us react to it. They modify their attack, whether it's a ransomware spin-off of a worm or whatever it is, and they come back at us again, and we fend it off again. And the thing about it is that it's going to be a never-ending challenge in cyber. This is what we have to just recognize that we're faced with today. It's not like there's a solution to it. It's not like, hey, I've got a steel utility pole, and it'll withstand wind gusts up to 50 miles an hour and will be safe. You're never going to be assured that you're safe. So this is an additional burden that has been placed on our entire utility and electricity system. And we just have to live with it. And I hope that we'll get the right kind of support from the US government for these wonderful people who are out working the grid problems every day.
So, General, if I can jump in on that, I would say this as well. I just want to echo what you said about our people. The 93,000 people that our sector of the industry employs have kept the grid up and running in a global pandemic of sort of unprecedented proportions. And that was definitely a risk, that we thought about and certainly exercised. And Gil mentioned that we exercise these types of risk scenarios in both the cyber security situations and physical security and pandemics, but no one really expected to deal with it in this big of a way. And I think we pivoted very quickly, worked with each other very well. And I want to just emphasize that we are an industry that is risk-based, and we have constantly been that way. This new challenge of cybersecurity, you're right, it's a journey, not a destination. We have to just keep upping our game. But I think importantly, working with our government partners, because they're the ones who are frankly on the front lines of that sort of offensive side, right? That we don't always know about, even if have clearances. And that's important because then they can give us greater situational awareness, communicating kind of in the unclassified space. And I would encourage our government partners to do that more, frankly, about some of these risks as they see them. So I think it's this evolution, and I think we're very well poised to deal with it. Are we there yet? We never will be there, but we want to keep benchmarking against ourselves and improving every year, year upon year, as quickly as we can. So I just wanted to commend you for mentioning that, and commend my brethren, electric utility folks.
Fantastic, and it helps us end on a more comprehensive note. So Gil, I want to, if we could, go to you just for the last thought. We've got a number of issues that have been raised today. You're right in the mix with this massive power authority. Give us your quick fortune teller's estimate. What's the likelihood for positive progress here in the next couple of years?
I think there's good momentum, right? From the federal government, I think, and the industry partnering to not only defend, but prepare and collectively partner in addressing the risk. It's, we began this talk, the general laid out a framework that this is complex. It's a big threat surface. There are a lot of industries affected across the economy. Electricity is the oxygen of the economy. And I think that from public-private partnerships, from industry and government collaboration, research and development, all of those areas we need to do. The role of the federal government, not just in defense, but as Joy said, in offense. That's very important. that we also punish the bad guys if they try to do something to us. So I'm just the people of the utility industry and the workers, as Joy and the gentleman mentioned, have been working hard at this. It's not an easy thing. We're not going to complete it tomorrow. It's an ongoing thing. But rest assured that everyone recognizes the threat. Everyone is putting the effort and the time. I know all of the utilities, not just in the public power space, but our colleagues in the investor-owned utility space and the rural cooperative space. There's a lot of work to be done, but there's a lot of people working at it day in and day out.
It's fantastic and a positive message to take away from a very realistic conversation. I want to thank all of you, Gil, Leo, Joy, and General Clark, for joining us. I know we weren't able to get to everybody's questions, but look for more in this space with the Cyber Statecraft Initiative and Global Energy Center soon. And thank you all very much. Have a good one.